Humans are still the cause of war, but more and more, we're not fighting them.
Humankind has had a 5,000-year-old monopoly on the fighting of war, and that's breaking down in our lifetime.
Unmanned killing machines are a dream come true for Army brass.
You're setting up the precedent that people can be killed pretty much at will.
In fact, they're such lethal machines, who needs humans?
Having people in the loop slows things down.
When you can kill people 7,000 miles away, I think there's something immoral about that.
I'm Anne Marie McDonald. This Doc Zone goes to the front lines of remote control war. Robots that kill. In the movies, they portray a future that has gone terribly wrong. They are no longer science fiction.
The demand for robots is growing and growing very rapidly. Robots can save lives.
Remotely piloted aircraft allow us to project power without projecting vulnerability.
What happens when armed robots can think for themselves?
The robots themselves will be sent to an area, and if they found anybody, they'd kill them.
Who gets to use them, and how?
Strictly speaking, under the laws of war, they're committing murder.
What are the repercussions for us?
It's an incredible, elegant technology that's on the cutting edge, and that's why scientists are so excited to work on it, but it may well be something that we regret later on.
As we move to more autonomous systems, then that begs the question of, well, how far do we let them go?
For the first time in human history, it's possible to kill someone on the other side of the planet in real time by remote control. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, are readied for takeoff at a secure airbase in Afghanistan. The Predator, or Reaper drone, takes off automatically and is linked to its operator at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada. The operator does not fly the drone, just gives it direction on where to go. The Predator can follow a target for more than a day without stopping. Its cameras have optical, infrared, and radar. They can see through clouds and in the dark. Information from the drone is sent along the chain of command from the Pentagon to the troops on the ground. The drones are armed with Hellfire missiles. Sometimes they observe, sometimes they kill.
You can use it in a lot of different ways. You can dwell on a particular target. You can watch to detect movement, to determine who's coming in and out of a particular location. And then you can react to that.
Faceless victims, unseen damage, and no troops at risk. It's easy to see why the robotic drone is quickly becoming the weapon of choice.
In this year alone, 2009, in the Air Force, we trained more remotely piloted aircraft pilots than we did fighter and bomber pilots. The number of remotely piloted aircraft combat air patrols that we've flown has increased well over 300%. So the demand is clearly been growing, and it continues to grow.
Drones are the beginning of a major shift in how war is fought. There is a surge in robotic systems, in operation or on the drawing board.
We went into Iraq with a handful of drones, pilotless planes, unmanned aerial systems, whatever you want to call them. We now have over 7,000 in the U.S. military inventory. We went on the ground with 0 unmanned ground vehicles. We now have over 12,000. And the U.S. is only one player in this unmanned revolution. There's 43 other countries that are all building, buying, and using military robots.
Peter W. Singer is the director of the 21st Century Defense Initiative at the Brookings Institution. His latest book is about the rise of robotics in conflict.
This is something incredibly important happening in not only the history of war itself, but maybe even the history of humanity overall.
We think of war through the lens of history, where battles were fought by countries with formal militaries. But war isn't like that anymore.
We are, in many cases, fighting what has been called asymmetric warfare,
against insurgents or guerrilla forces that are not a state, where one side has the power, has the technology, has the financial muscle, the other side has the very highly motivated troops on the ground.
Insurgents are reluctant to directly engage a superior force. Camouflaged within the civilian population, they strike back with guns, missiles, and a simple yet deadly weapon, the improvised explosive device. IEDs are made out of anything that explodes and are detonated by a tripwire or cell phone. They're hard to spot, difficult to defuse, and deadly. – 63% of Canadian fatalities in Afghanistan have been caused by IEDs. These crude weapons support the primary goal of an insurgents' war: kill enough of the occupiers, and they will leave. But now, there is a way to combat the threat.
The Army tells us that 52% of their casualties come at first contact with the enemy. We say, what a great job for a robot. Robots can save lives.
It's made big differences. In 2003, when I was in Iraq, the people that used robots, obviously the injuries were minimal. Those that did not use robots were catastrophic. You know, I've heard from guys that said the robots have saved their lives and continue to save their lives. This is potentially a lost soldier. This could have been a soldier.
That's the ultimate appeal of unmanned systems, that you can use them and not have to worry about writing that letter to someone's mother. It makes perfect sense, perfect logic.
The demand for warbots has created a boom in the robotics industry. Billions of dollars in military spending is driving companies, large and small, to make incredible leaps in technology.
It has the lethal force, which is an M240 machine gun.
The plane can autonomously follow a target.
It's an airplane that can do vertical takeoff and landing and hover.
3 gyros, 3 accelerometers, barometric pressure, and a GPS.
These ultrasonic pingers up here send out clicks like a bat.
The system is so easy to use that anyone can do it.
All branches of the U.S. military are shifting to robots.
Unmanned systems are a huge priority for the Navy. We're flying about 15,000 hours a month in theater. We're also looking at unmanned systems for surface vehicles. We're seeing just a huge explosion.
Congress has decreed that by 2015, 1/3 of the U.S. Army's ground systems must be unmanned. Jeeps, tanks, and small drones are only the beginning. Other militaries are following suit.
Canada, the UK, Australia, France, Italy, Germany, all the major countries are heavily involved in development as well as acquisition of unmanned systems.
In the past 2 years, Canadian forces have increased their use of unmanned drones tenfold and are now adding much smaller micro-drones. But it is still the U.S. that is leading the robot revolution. Most robots have a single function. The next stage of development is a multitasking robot. Meet the Bear, a humanoid robot with hands and legs. It can replace the human in jobs that are dirty, dangerous, and dull. The Bear was originally designed to help rescue wounded soldiers from the battlefield. It can lift 500 pounds and can quickly move a soldier out of harm's way.
We've been working on the Bear since 2005 with a sequence of prototypes. Now we're on version 7.2. It features dual articulated legs.
Very quickly, people realized that if we could build a robot that was capable of going out and rescuing somebody from a burning building or from a battlefield, that this robot would be capable of many other tasks as well, loading and unloading trucks, carrying gear for soldiers. So there's a lot of excitement about the type of things this robot could be used for.
The U.S. military is spending billions on advanced robotic systems such as the Bear. But its designers are adamant. This is a friendly bear.
We get a lot of comments about the Bear's look. It has a cute little head. It's an otherwise imposing machine.
We have a very different view of robots. The Bear is really focused on saving people's lives and making the world a safer place.
I really approved of the Vecna Bear idea of bringing soldiers back and not risking other people's lives. But the same robot could go out there and explode itself when it finds someone. To take military funding for robotics work and think that it won't be used to kill people is delusional, really.
Will we see robot combat? Yes, I think we will. You know, the history of any military system is it goes from tactical reconnaissance to strike.
Ground robots have already been weaponized. The Mars is a remote-controlled warbot equipped with multiple cameras, night vision, infrared, and thermal imaging. It can outrun a human and is capable of lethal force.
Stop where you are.
The Mars is armed with 4 grenade launchers and an M240 machine gun with 400 rounds of ammunition. While armed ground robots are relatively new, the Predator drone has been carrying weapons since 2001. The new Reaper drone can carry 7 times as many missiles. For the United States military, armed drones are an indispensable tool. This isn't just how war will be fought in the future. It's how war is fought right now.
We have the Predator Reaper in theater today. When you look at the kill chain, if you have a platform that you can see the target, and if you have a weapon, why not engage the target?
Humankind has had a 5,000-year-old monopoly on the fighting of war, and that's breaking down in our lifetime.
Seeing bad guys on the screen and watching them possibly get dispatched and then going down the street to Taco Bell for lunch is kind of a surreal effect.
Does it not go beyond the pale? Is it okay to use systems that really reinforce game playing? Do we want that kind of mentality about killing other human beings?
Jody Williams won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for helping to create the international campaign to ban landmines.
So you have to confront the harm you're causing. And when you can sit in Nevada and kill people 7,000 some odd miles away,
3, 2, 1, bombs away. Oh, nicely done, sir.
I think there's something unethical and immoral about that.
Robot technology may make the battlefield seem a lot like virtual reality. But on the ground, it's not a game. It's real, and it comes with its own kind of terror. New York Times journalist David Rode lived that nightmare. In 2008, he was kidnapped by the Taliban and held in the tribal areas of Pakistan. For 7 months, Rode lived with the threat of being killed, either by the Taliban or by the American drones.
You can hear the drones overhead. They sound sort of like a small propeller aircraft circling overhead. You can't really see them very clearly in the sky, and they're able to circle for hours at a time.
Rode was moved several times. On the move in a vehicle, he was more vulnerable, more exposed, and much more likely to be hit.
They were nervous about moving around in their cars. There was a sense that they were constantly being watched. And at the same time, they created this real paranoia among the Taliban. There was really, no warning and no sense of where a drone missile was going to strike. We heard a drone overhead, and then at the last second, the sound of a missile coming through the air, and then this very large explosion. strike was so close that shrapnel from the missile actually landed in the yard of the house where we were staying.
The Hellfire missile destroyed a car in front of the house where Road was being held. 7 Taliban inside the car were killed. The military claim they only use drone strikes against known enemies. But because insurgents position themselves in populated areas, inevitably civilians get killed. Collateral damage, as it's known, is always contentious. Remote control warfare only makes it worse.
The interesting part of the debate over these drone strikes into places like Pakistan is how do you measure effectiveness? So by one measure, they're incredibly effective. We've killed more than 20 top al-Qaeda and allied militant group leaders using these drones without having to send a single soldier or pilot into harm's way. The problem is there's, of course, other measures of effectiveness out there. How does sending robotics out to do your fighting for you play on the ground?
The Taliban saw the use of drones as cowardly. They thought it was a sign that American soldiers weren't willing to just kind of get on the ground and fight them face to face.
So, for example, one of the most lethal counters to a machine gun armed ground robot isn't a Taliban armed with an AK-47. It's a young 6-year-old Afghan boy sent out by the Taliban with a can of spray paint. They'll defeat your system for 40 cents, and you have a terrible dilemma. You can either let them defeat your system, or you can shoot a 6-year-old. These things are really complex. My fear is that we may be falling into the very same trap that the Israelis have fallen into in their strikes, where they've gotten very good at killing Hamas leaders, but they've gotten very bad at preventing a 12-year-old from wanting to join Hamas.
You may be able to win the war with a remote-controlled weapon, but can you win the peace? Can you win the hearts and minds of people?
Coming up next, the new frontier, robots that think for themselves.
You have distributed command and control, but concentrated firepower. Very different model of war.
Tens of thousands of military robots are in use today, and more of them are carrying weapons. They are changing how war is fought and raising new questions about ethics and the rule of law. As advanced as today's robotics seem, as quickly as the technology is developing, it's still in its infancy.
We are today with remotely piloted aircraft where we were about in the 1920s with manned aircraft. We're in the early stages of exploiting their capability.
If this is an industry in its infancy, what is the military's vision for the future? Are they going to build robots that can think for themselves, even decide who to kill?
When people think of robots, they think of the Terminator. I wouldn't be so bothered if we had Terminators, because Terminators are intelligent. If I had to make a comparison between a Terminator and a washing machine, which is the robot closer to current robots, they were a lot closer to a washing machine than they are to a Terminator.
Ground robots that are in use today on the battlefield are not autonomous. They are strictly remote control.
Right now, there's a one-to-one relationship between robot operator and robot. Kind of head down, butt up, operating the robot with tremendous focus, driving it every step of the way.
Unmanned aerial vehicles have a much higher level of autonomy. They pretty much fly themselves.
Here you have a 3D C4I map of the scenario. You'll get the UAVs and a video projection of each video, which is this video projected on a 3D map. Everything is done automatically. I don't have to fly the UAV. It's just point and click.
Drones are able to adapt to their environment, responding to wind speeds and weather conditions without any human input. Ground robots have to navigate more complicated terrain. But with advances in obstacle detection and avoidance, they are not far behind their aerial counterparts.
I think that new exciting things that we see in the robotics field is basically building in more intelligence and autonomy, letting the robots do more work and think for themselves more.
More and more authority will be given to these systems, and autonomy is being pushed more and more to the so-called tip of the spear in warfare, where these decisions will have to be made by these machines.
The robot of the future won't need an operator at all, just someone to give it a few instructions.
A fully deployed bear would likely operate like a capable assistant. You would point to, say, a box, and you would say to the robot, pick up that box. And the robot would do all the local planning in order to accomplish that task. Once it's picked up the box, it would ask you again, what would you like to do next? And if the answer is put that box over there, you would give that command and the robot would finish the rest of the tasks. Now, you could have one operator commanding one bear, or in this scenario, you could also envision having one operator commanding many bears.
The holy grail of military robotics is the fully autonomous system. A robot that needs no human input, equipped with night vision and face recognition, faster and stronger than any soldier. An army of them could be invincible.
As we move to more autonomous systems, then that begs the question of, well, how far do we let them go?
I think it's clear from all the military documents I've read over the last 6 or 7 years that autonomy is the end goal. It's not any surprise. I think everybody believes that that's where it's going, and maybe a lot sooner than what people think.
But they don't get tired. They don't get irrational, emotional. They just do their job. And the fact that Robot X19 saw X18 taken out yesterday won't upset him. He'll still carry on doing his job.
As we move into more sophisticated autonomous weapons, what does that portend?
But what happens when autonomous robots kill? The military maintains that a human will always make that final decision.
There will always be a human in the loop. There's no proclivity to turn over the conduct of warfare to a bunch of automated systems. Ain't gonna happen.
This mantra of human in the loop is, you hear it so often, it's almost like a catechism that we say to sort of make ourselves feel better. But the irony is that, one, we're constantly changing the definition of what it means to be in the loop.
Humans can only make a finite number of decisions at one time. If one operator sends a number of robots into a combat situation, and they all need to make split-second decisions, the human is the weak link.
And they're going to have to make decisions at lightning speed as to whether to shoot these people or not. And that's going to be impossible, I think, for a person to do. So I don't think it would be too long before they make that autonomous.
Once robots are part of the normal battlefield, their speed will be far greater than our own.
Having people in the loop slows things down. Our wetware, our brains operate at a fixed rate.
But our brains do give us one advantage over robots: the ability to reason.
We have to double check with Hire for
Human judgment is critical in operations on the ground. Programming that kind of decision-making into an armed robot is still beyond technology's grasp.
For instance, Marines were standing near an alleyway and they saw insurgents in the alleyway. They immediately became alerted, pointed their machine guns at them, noticed they were carrying a coffin. So what they did was they lowered their machine guns, took off their helmets, bowed their heads respectfully, and let the insurgents pass. So, you know, would a robot know to do that? You could obviously program into it, don't kill insurgents carrying a coffin, and now you're going to have every insurgent in the world carrying a coffin with them. Humans can make mistakes, but the robot has no common sense whatsoever.
Even identifying the enemy would be difficult.
If you managed to get all the insurgents to wear great big bright purple outfits, then you could pin them down. But at the moment, it would all be impossible to get a vision system that could work on the difference between a child even and a soldier.
When humans make mistakes in warfare, they are generally held accountable. But if a robot does make a fatal mistake, who is responsible?
Giving this level of autonomy, giving this kind of distribution of command and control, raises a whole host of accountability questions. It makes the chain of command very tough to figure out.
If it goes outside the range of the rules of engagement that were programmed into it, who's committed the war crime? Clearly, there has been one, but is it the person who designed the system? Is it the person who programmed it for this particular engagement? Is it the person who trained it, taught it how to recognize different types of target?
Robots are moving closer to thinking and acting like humans. But every advance complicates the issues of accountability and ethics. Now, a new form of warbot is being developed with an artificial intelligence that is a world away from human reasoning.
Almost like a swarm of bees or ants or a wolf pack, you have distributed command and control, but concentrated firepower. That is, everyone making their own little decisions, but then they find what they're hunting for, and then they coalesce and gather around them and then overwhelm them. Very different model of war.
It's called a swarm, a group of robots focused on a single task. They are one entity with many parts, operating from within a collective hive mind. There is no central leadership within a robotic swarm. By its nature, a swarm cannot be under human control.
They kind of organize themselves in an intelligent way and do something that's coherent and really cool. For example, if you all to go through the doorway, it would be an example of them kind of negotiating amongst themselves, so there's no one given leader saying, you go first, you go second. They're all kind of deciding amongst themselves who goes first, who goes second, without a centralized leader or decision maker.
It's very difficult. If you've got a big enough swarm, it's really impossible for a human to be involved in this much. They can send them in, they can call them off, but they can't see much what's going on. Too many images, too much data. Next step beyond that would be full autonomy. The robots themselves would be sent to an area, and if they found anybody, they'd kill them.
When you move to swarms, now you're looking at maybe one operator who programs the swarm being able to have the potential of multiple effects on multiple targets.
Combining swarm technology with micro-vehicles and UAVs is the next step for the Air Force. And it's happening soon.
In 2015, our near-term goal is to demonstrate a bird-sized UAV capable of operating semi-autonomously, somewhat by itself, somewhat guided, for up to a week. We're replicating animals because they are around us. They've been proven to be able to fly in these environments at various conditions. One of the 2030 goals has been able to operate a swarm of these vehicles. It's not science fiction, but it is way out science.
Swarms capable of self-navigation, face recognition, and lethal force are likely inevitable. But will they be used before they can be programmed to reason and discriminate?
There's not a chance of people waiting till we can do proper discrimination. You might, in all the best will in the world, not be intending to use it. But what if a major conflict happens and other people are using robots against you and you've got the technology there? You will use it. People always do.
If the military had fully autonomous, armed robots, would they use them?
Generally speaking, if the target is lawful and you otherwise comply with the law of war, it doesn't matter how you kill him or her. If we had a totally bloodless way of doing it, and we had some kind of autonomous weapon system that would so terrify the militias in Sudan and everywhere else and we could have deployed that. Could good have come from it? Perhaps it might have. I don't feel better if a lot of Americans die in the effort. I'm okay with all of them dying in the effort.
I cannot imagine how much easier it will be for them when it's autonomous weapons, nobody goes and gets killed, everybody else is the one who gets killed, and we think that's okay.
Next, spies, robots, and the rules of war.
You're setting up the precedent that people can be killed pretty much at will. That really amounts to lawlessness.
Yes, we can! Ground the drones! Yes, we can! Bring them home! Yes, we can! Ground the drones! Yes, we can! Bring them home!
You know, it's amazing. People in Nevada are pushing buttons to determine people's lives in Pakistan. They're just mostly killing civilians, 90% civilians. I mean, they want to take one guy out, they'll take a whole wedding party out. I just got to say, to me, it's an awful way to fight a war.
These protesters are mobilizing against what they assume is a military operation. But the CIA isn't part of the military.
Because you can do more with the technology itself, it means those without military training are starting to make decisions that are military in nature. Over the last year and a half, we've carried out more robotic drone strikes into Pakistan than we did manned bomber strikes during the Kosovo War just a decade ago. So by the measures of the Kosovo War, we're at war. But unlike the Kosovo War, we didn't have a debate about it in our Congress or parliaments or in the UN. The media doesn't report it every night breathlessly like they did the Kosovo War. We just do it because we view it as costless to us.
Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders have fled Afghanistan and hidden out in remote tribal regions of Pakistan. The U.S. military cannot send ground troops or manned planes into Pakistan without a formal declaration of war. But a Hellfire missile fired from 20,000 feet above dispatches a target with no chance of retaliation. It seems like a perfect solution if you're on the other side of the world.
War is war. There's no way to pretend that people aren't dying and that there's not, blood and death and violence and tremendous fear. Drones don't eliminate that. They just make it seem more antiseptic for some people.
The CIA drone strikes began under the Bush administration. They've been considered so effective that Obama's government has escalated the program dramatically.
We have a clear and focused goal: to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
I mean, there's not even a declared war in Pakistan. Many of the drones are flown by CIA agents. They are not uniformed combatants. They could actually be taken before the International Criminal Court. They're committing murder. Strictly speaking, under the laws of war, they're committing murder.
The CIA claims the drone attacks in Pakistan are legal and carefully monitored. But how the rules of war apply is not entirely clear. The military has strict rules about who is targeted and why. But the CIA operates under a shroud of secrecy.
We don't know what exactly process is being determined over when a strike happens. How do they determine when there's, for example, too many civilians in the way and when there's not? And most importantly, the people who are making those decisions, do they have the training and experience to do that?
The United Nations wanted answers to these questions. They asked Special Envoy Philip Alston to examine the CIA's use of armed drones in Pakistan. In guarded language, he reported that the use of drones for targeted killing is almost never likely to be legal. And he condemned the CIA for its lack of transparency in choosing targets.
The report that I just presented to the UN Human Rights Council looked at a whole range of issues. There are strict limits as to who you can target and so on. Now, the concern is that the US Department of Defense pretty much follows those sort of rules and prides itself on doing it professionally. The CIA, on the other hand, as far as we know, does not have such structures in place. Now, it's conceivable that they do. The problem, of course, is that they will say nothing.
They don't have rules. That's the whole point. And even if they do, nobody knows what they are, because they're internal and top secret, because if you tell anybody, then they'll know what you're doing. And I keep thinking, hello, the people in Pakistan know what's happening. We pretend that there's no drone program. The people who are being killed know there's a drone program.
But for the CIA, targeting and killing terrorists is paramount.
The assumption that tends to be made, at least in the United States, is, well, of course you've got to take that person out. There is no other option. The international law response is that really amounts to lawlessness. The cost of taking out these individuals is actually far greater than one thinks, because you're setting up the precedent that people can be killed pretty much at will.
Those in power are the ones who write the laws, right? The United States is excellent at doing what it wants, and saying that the other guy doing the same thing is somehow breaking the rules. You can do that if you have the biggest military in the world, apparently. And everybody knows that you're capable of invasion. We've done it a lot.
As ground systems, autonomy, and swarm technology continue to develop, will the CIA develop a robot army? And if they do, who else will?
This all sounds like a bad Hollywood movie, but I'm not making this stuff up. And so one of the sort of fundamental questions in a revolution in a technology is not only what can you do with the technology, but who gets to use it? What organization should be allowed to use it? What organization should not be allowed to use it?
If they can use those autonomous weapons, the sky's the limit, I would say, about what they can use in the future without oversight. It's a future I don't want to think about.
Next, on remote control war, will the robots be coming for us?
Risk-free war is risk-free to the military, but it's not risk-free to your civilians.
Military robots are changing the nature of global combat. They're removing soldiers from the battlefield, mimicking the animal world, and rewriting the laws of war. But could they also be turned back on us?
These technologies, and in this case we're talking about unmanned systems, warbots. These technologies aren't like an aircraft carrier. They're not like an atomic bomb, where you really do need a large structure, a large industry to be able to put this thing together.
How easy is it to make your own UAV? You know, if you can build an IKEA chair, you can build an UAV.
Chris Anderson is the editor of Wired magazine. In his spare time, he runs his own website, DIY Drones.
It's not totally plug and play. They're not being sold at Walmart yet, but we're not far off. You know, GPS is cheap, wireless is cheap, Wi-Fi is cheap, cameras are cheap, sensors are cheap. It's all getting really cheap.
The object of this competition is to build a vehicle that can go around the building, all by itself and for less than $300. People from across North America and Europe have come to compete. The youngest is just 15. The military is pumping billions of dollars into autonomous robots. These hobbyists have a limit of $300. How good can they be?
Be prepared to duck.
Yeah! Better than you'd think.
Unfortunately, so close.
We're the University of Arizona Aerial Robotics Club. We just did a 21-second autonomous flight with an autonomous landing. We're pretty happy about it. These motors are probably worth $3 each. And I'm not kidding, but really, if we ramp these up to a little bit nicer motor, you'd see the speed just rocket up. What's the fastest you've seen?
The fastest I've seen electric is about 210 miles an hour.
As long as the battery lasts, it can keep going.
I've had people say, I won't say who they were working for, but for a large defense contractor say, wow, look what you guys have done for 150 bucks. We can do the same thing for $2 million.
Regular people in their basements, garages, etc., are making what used to be military-industrial complex stuff.
There it goes.
One of the things that concerns me, though, is how easy it would be for terrorists or insurgents to make these weapons. You can make 300 of them, load them with explosives and run them into a crowded city, and there'll be no stopping them. Risk-free war is risk-free to the military, but it's not risk-free to your civilians. You're much more going to get terrorist attacks within your cities, and so it's not really risk-free. The jury's still out on it.
As these technologies of remotely piloted aircraft grow and explode, we're going to face situations where adversaries are going to be using remotely piloted aircraft coming into our airspace. So one of the things that we're working on very hard today is to be able to engage adversary remotely piloted aircraft.
One of the big worries that the security forces have is not that they're worried about one of these planes, for instance, coming over, but what if 1,000 of them arrived? You could shoot some of them down, but you wouldn't get all of them.
It's not what can you do with technology, it's the should part that's really what's important today and in terms of history.
Logic would dictate that drones, now that 40 countries have them, one of those 40 is definitely, at some point in time, going to be an enemy. And if they can use them, we'll have more on our hands than planes flying into the Twin Towers, won't we?
Before we go, a couple of Doc Zone episodes coming in the weeks ahead. Next time, the unfinished business of feminism.
We've got into a terrible, terrible muddle.
Compared to other countries, our gender gap is getting worse.
What are the actual goals of feminism?
Nowadays, there's even confusion at the core.
You have anti-feminist women claiming to be feminists.
So who's going to ride the next wave?
I say women, you say power.
The F word.
Rhythm.
And in 2 weeks, anti-aging cures are the new holy grail.
We introduce post-electromagnetic fields into your body.
And you won't believe what's out there.
This machine was information brought back from a near-death experience.
Bob McDonald let some hot air out of a few big claims.
I used to have a car like this.
For all those boomers refusing to go gently, magical mystery cures in 2 weeks. I'm Anne-Marie McDonald. Thanks for watching.